Have you ever noticed that, like, when you're stressed out, every little sound kind of seems to, like, grate on your nerves? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the world suddenly gets turned up way too loud.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to be diving into that today. We're going to unpack how chronic stress actually changes how our brains process sound.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Because we think of stress as this emotional thing,
Right.
but it really impacts how we perceive the world,
It does. It really does.
even down to the level of, like,
Uh-huh.
basic sensory information,
Yeah.
like
That's
sounds.
the everyday sounds.
So where is this all coming from? What are we looking at today?
We were looking at a recent research article from Neuroscience News.
Okay.
It's called Stress Alters How the Brain Processes Sound.
Okay.
And it's based on findings from PLOS Biology.
Gotcha.
And honestly, some of the findings are pretty surprising.
Okay, so, like, what kind of surprises are we talking about here?
So one of the things that they found was that under chronic stress, quieter everyday sounds actually need to be louder
Really?
for our brains to register them the same way. It's like our brains are turning down the volume
wow.
on the world around us.
So that feeling of tuning out more when you're stressed,
Right.
maybe that's not just in our heads.
Yeah.
There's actually, like, real science going on here.
Yeah, there's something to it.
So is this about our ears, or is it something else going on?
It's not your ears.
Okay.
It's about how your brain is processing that auditory information.
Okay.
The researchers identified specific brain cells
Okay.
that are responsible for this effect.
Uh-huh.
And it gets pretty interesting.
I am all ears.
Okay.
No pun intended.
All right. So tell me more about this.
So there's a pathway in your brain
Okay.
for processing sounds.
Okay.
Under stress, certain cells along this pathway,
Okay.
called SST cells,
Mm-hmm.
become like a noisy air conditioner.
Okay.
They're working overtime, and that extra activity ends up drowning out the actual conversation.
Happening between other neurons that are responsible for processing sound.
So there's, like, all this extra noise in our brains when we're stressed,
Oh.
so it makes it harder to hear the signals from the cells
Right.
that are actually trying to process the sounds.
Exactly.
That's wild.
Yeah, it is.
So it's not just that these overactive cells are making it harder to hear,
Uh-huh.
but they might be changing the way we perceive
Yes.
the sounds themselves.
It's like imagine the air conditioner.
Okay.
Not just being loud,
Right.
but actually distorting the conversation you're trying to hear.
So it's not just the volume. It's
Yeah.
about, like, actually changing how our brains are interpreting the sounds.
Yeah.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is.
Have you ever noticed how,
Yeah.
like, everyday sounds can feel more jarring
Right.
or unpleasant when you're stressed?
Yeah.
Like, just the hum of the refrigerator or
Mhm.
traffic outside
Yeah,
suddenly feels way more intense.
for sure.
You know, now that you mention it. There are definitely times when I'm totally stressed.
Right.
And, like, the sound of my neighbor's dog barking just
Yeah.
feels like nails on a chalkboard.
I can relate to that.
It's like stress is putting this weird filter on our reality,
Yeah.
making everyday sounds feel so much more intense,
Right.
and maybe even changing how we, like, interpret them.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept.
It really is.
And if that's happening with sound, could stress be affecting our other senses
Really?
in similar ways?
You're saying stress could, like, make food taste different,
It's possible.
or even change how we see colors.
Yeah, it's definitely possible.
Wow.
These findings open up a whole new way of thinking about stress
Okay.
and its impact on our daily lives.
Okay.
It's not just an emotional experience.
Right.
It's actually changing
Wow.
how our brains take in information.
So if our brains are essentially misinterpreting sounds,
Uh-huh.
and maybe even other senses when we're stressed,
Yeah.
could that lead to, like, misunderstandings?
Yeah.
Or even conflicts with others?
It very well could.
How can we be aware of this potential impact?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think this understanding can help us be more compassionate
Okay.
towards ourselves and others,
Right.
especially those dealing with chronic stress.
Okay.
You know, if someone is reacting more strongly to sounds,
Right.
it might not just be them being oversensitive.
Right.
Their brain could literally be processing things differently
Because of the stress.
because of stress. Exactly.
So it's not about blaming someone for being too sensitive,
Right.
but understanding that there might be a real
Yeah.
neurological reason
Exactly.
for their reaction.
Yeah. And it goes beyond individual interactions.
Okay.
Think about places like hospitals
Okay.
or schools where stress levels can be high.
Yeah, for sure.
Designing these spaces with an understanding of how sound is processed
Okay.
differently under stress
Right.
could help minimize sensory overload
Mm-hmm.
and create calmer environments.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But isn't it also important to consider, like, individual preferences?
Oh, absolutely.
Because, like, some people might actually find a bit of background noise comforting,
Wait.
even when they're stressed.
Yeah, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
But this new understanding of how stress impacts sensory processing
Okay.
gives us a really valuable starting point for
Okay.
creating spaces that are truly supportive.
So it's about recognizing that our sensory experiences
Yes.
aren't always objective.
Right.
They're influenced by so many factors,
Uh-huh.
including how stressed we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recognizing that can be incredibly empowering.
Okay.
If we understand how stress is impacting our perception, we can start to take control.
So things like mindfulness
Yeah.
or other stress management techniques could
Exactly.
actually help our brains process
Absolutely.
sensory information in a healthier way.
Yes. It's not about feeling powerless against stress.
Yay.
It's about learning to manage it and understanding the impact it has
Yeah.
on our minds and bodies.
This is really eye-opening.
It is.
Before we wrap up,
Yep.
is there anything else you think we should keep in mind?
Mm.
Yeah, it's a lot to take
Yeah.
in this whole idea that stress
Yeah.
isn't just like an emotion.
Right.
It can actually change how we experience the world around us.
Yeah, and it really challenges our assumptions
It does.
about how we perceive reality.
It really does.
And as you said, it opens up so many questions.
It does.
Like, how does stress impact our other senses?
Yeah.
What specific strategies
Right.
can we use to mitigate these effects?
There are so many questions.
There are.
But I think that's the beauty of science,
Yeah.
right?
I agree.
There's always more to discover, more to learn,
Absolutely.
and that curiosity is what drives us forward.
It is.
I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
and I hope you're walking away with a new perspective on stress
Right.
and its impact on your senses.
Before we go,
Yeah.
I'd like to leave you with one final thought
Okay.
to ponder.
Okay.
If stress can actually alter our perception of the world around us,
Okay.
even down to the sounds we hear,
Right.
what does that mean
Yeah.
for how we navigate a world
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be increasingly full of stressors?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
It's almost like a challenge to be more aware
it is.
of how stress is impacting us,
Right.
not just emotionally,
Yeah,
but in how we literally perceive the world.
exactly.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to pay attention
To your own experiences.
to your own experiences with sound and stress.
Yeah. What do you notice?
What do you notice?
How does your perception change
How does it change
when you're feeling overwhelmed?
when you're feeling overwhelmed?
It's a conversation worth continuing,
It is.
both within ourselves
Yeah.
and with each other.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll catch you next time
All right.
for another fascinating exploration
Okay.
into the world of knowledge.